What's up everybody, Matt Maran here for another car review. This is of course the 2019 Lexus UX 200 F Sport. Huge thanks to Lexus for providing me with this all new UX to review for you guys today. So about the UX, well, this is the new smallest baby crossover here from Lexus, and I think it's a really cool looking little crossover here. It's just very short, very low, and a little more narrow than like the NX, which was the previous small Lexus SUV. This one is now the smallest, and it's about 5 inches shorter than the NX and about 1 inch narrower, and looks good though up front here. You have the traditional Lexus spindle grille, which I am really starting to love. I really like those headlamps too, which are very sharp and futuristic looking. And overall, I think the front end is actually, is nice and sporty here for this F Sport version, but if you go for the non-F Sport, it's even a little less sporty looking. But I think both of them look really, really good. Coming down to the sides here, you have these nice 18-inch wheels that are gray here in the F Sport version and look good. You do also, of course, since it's a crossover, have to have the plastic body cladding, which is just typical these days, but I think it's well executed here on the UX and looks good. And going down to the rest of the sides, you just have lots of angles, and it's a very angular vehicle. It's very exciting to look at. But going out back, that is actually my favorite part of the UX, is the back end of it. I love that continuous LED taillight there that goes across the entire back end. And me being a retro lover, I also love how the tail lamps kind of form little fins there at one point. And I don't really think they're going for anything retro there. It's just very futuristic, but I love that design element of having the lights actually come up on their own independent of the bodywork there. I think that's a really cool idea, and I really love the way that looks. Otherwise, you have the more aggressive rear bumper there in typical crossover fashion, and it just looks, again, very squat and compact for this smallest SUV, and looks really good. So overall, I personally think that the styling is really spot on here for this new Lexus UX. Right, for the interior of the UX here, well, I'm pretty impressed with just how nice of a place it is, considering this is the smallest, cheapest Lexus. It still is pretty nice and pretty close to the quality of all the other Lexus models in the range. So anyway, first thing, sitting down in these seats here, you have these new Lux seats, they call it, which are like a synthetic leather that they have, faux leather, but they feel very close to leather to me. I think they still feel very nice and smooth and silky. I like that they're perforated here in the middle. I like the black stripe. The red is also a very cool combo to have with the blue exterior. It's awesome that they offer that, and I think it actually works here. And it looks really good, but they also feel really good too, these seats. So they're F Sport seats, so they're going to be a little bit sportier than of course the regular UX seats, but I really like them. They have great torso bolstering and also nice thigh bolstering too that comes up nicely and holds you in place well, while still not being too tight. They'll of course accommodate many different body types, and really comfortable seats too. In prior F Sport models that I've reviewed this year, they've been a little bit on the firmer side sometimes in the back. This one though seems a little bit more comfortable, and so overall I really like these seats. Next to the steering wheel here in the F Sport version of the UX, which is really great. A little bit beefier here in the F Sport one, of course, and I really love it. I love the red stitching you have, the perforated leather here on the sides of it just feels great. It has an awesome 9-3 grip, nice little 10-2 notches. It's amazing just how beefy this wheel feels though. It's awesome. You also have a good assortment of buttons here, but if you've ever driven any other Lexus in the past few years, you'll be very at home with all these buttons. Just on the left to control the gauge cluster, and then volume controls, and then on the right here you have your cruise control set up here. This one of course has the Lexus safety suite, so you have the lane departure mitigation warning and forward collision and all the adaptive cruise control, all that kind of stuff here, which is great. And you also have paddle shifters here on the wheel, which look like metal but actually are plastic, but they feel nice and heavy and substantial, which is good to see and feel. And so overall, great steering wheel. Gauges here in the UX 200, again for the F Sport, are slightly different than what you get in a regular UX, and these are basically the same F Sport gauges you see in any other F Sport model from Lexus. They're identical. They're very simple, very straightforward. Not a ton of information, but I do love, their standard party trick is how that center mounted tack will slide over to the right hand side there, and then you have a larger view of some of the information like a G meter, and then also just your basic trip information, fuel economy, stuff like that. And some of that can also be displayed in the middle portion of the tack there in the bottom as well, which is great to have that. I still wish there was a little more infotainment related stuff in the gauge cluster. It would be kind of nice to see, since a lot of other digital digital clusters are doing that these days, where you can show, navigation instructions, or, your audio, or just a few other things would be kind of nice, because they've used the same cluster for several years now, and I still like it, but compared to some of the competition, I feel like they're falling behind a little bit with that. Coming over to the center of the dashboard here, right up top, you have this 10.3-inch infotainment screen. It's the same setup as any other Lexus model, where you use this mouse pad-like controller down here to scroll through everything. And with time, you kind of have a little bit of practice, you do get used to this mouse pad thing, but it still isn't super precise. And so I still don't find myself falling in love with it, but it works. Although I still prefer just a simple touch screen. I think that's much easier and more natural for people these days, since they're constantly touching things on their smartphone and stuff. But anyway, this screen is really nice. The one really big news thing here is it has Apple CarPlay and Amazon Alexa. Unfortunately, there is no Android Auto still in any Toyota or Lexus model, but I'm hoping they work on that and bring that relatively soon. But in the meantime, for the 2019 UXs here, you have Apple CarPlay, which is great to have if you're an Apple user. Otherwise, it has satellite radio, Bluetooth audio streaming, all that type of stuff. Navigation maps are pretty dated. That's another complaint I have with this infotainment system. So many of the other competitors, especially from Germany, have much more advanced looking maps these days, and these ones just look very old and outdated, honestly. But otherwise, the interface looks pretty nice and sleek and modern, and very easy to get through all the other settings and things like that. So there's not a whole lot to it, and once you kind of learn your way around it, it's not too bad. And another thing I love is just the materials you have here. Moving down, you'll see this again, more of like a soft padded leather like material that runs across the dashboard here with some stitching, which is real stitching, feels great. And then you have these two air vents. Then you have your auto climate controls, which are this little row of toggle switches, which really feel great to use. And then you have a little readout here, which will obviously show your temperature and things like that. Coming down, you have a CD drive, which is getting more and more rare these days, but Lexus is continuing on with that. And then you have your row of seat controls here. In this one, as equipped, it has the ventilated seats, the heated seats, and also heated steering wheel. The heated steering wheel is an option in addition to a regular F Sport model, and it's only I think $500 or something. All the options are very reasonable. Another option coming down, so this one does not have a wireless charging pad, but this area here could be a wireless charging pad. It's only $75 to get a wireless charging pad there, but this one does not have that option here. But otherwise, it's just a nice rubberized pad to put a phone or something like that that's smaller and slimmer. And then you have this 12-volt power outlet here, which pops up, very cool there. And then you have your two cup holders here and other storage spaces here. In the doors, you'll have a nice large pocket with a bottle holder, which is great to see. Coming back over to the center here, for your volume and tune controls, you're probably wondering where the volume and tune knobs were. They're down here. And so it's this little scroller wheel that kind of sticks out in front here for the volume. And then you have buttons here, shortcuts for radio, media, and all going left and right, kind of like a tune knob to switch radio station, presets, things like that with those. And then you have the tune knob here, which is another little scroll wheel popping out on the left-hand side there. And it's supposed to be designed so that it's used, very closely to the mouse pad here. So it's all in one area as you're resting your arm on this armrest. So it's a very cool setup. Lexus has such unique integrations for volume and tune knob. In the LS and the ES, they combine the volume and tune knob into one knob on the dashboard. In this, they put it down here. So it's always a different place in these modern Lexuses, but I think it's so creative of them, and I actually think that probably works pretty well, but I'll be, of course, testing it out over my week of driving and see how that actually works in reality. Speaking of this armrest, though, so it's nice and covered in this, more of this leather-like material, but it's not super soft. There's a little bit of padding, but then it's pretty firm underneath that. But anyway, you open that up, and then you will see a nice, pretty deep cubby here. A little bit narrow, but should be totally usable, of course, for sunglasses, things like that. And you also will see two USB jacks and an auxiliary jack in there. And one interesting thing, though, so it's nice that this armrest does open both on the left side and the right side, but it really jiggles, and I don't know if this is just because it's a pre-production one or if it's actually broken. I'm not sure, but just this vehicle arrived like this, where this back part just jiggles and just is super loose. It actually causes it to rattle a little bit as well, which is very un-Lexus-like. Usually they don't have any kind of rattles, any kind of build quality issues whatsoever. So this must just be a bizarre, exclusion, and just, one-off thing with this car here. But just thought that was worth mentioning. Otherwise, this interior, like I said, is is very nice and high quality. I mean, you do have, it's a little bit harder here on the doors than what you get in some other Lexuses sometimes, but all the elbow points, over here on the doors also feel nice. Like I said, the dashboard's nice and padded a little bit, and even down by your knees here is padded, which is a rare thing. A lot of other vehicles, even in the luxury segment, don't have padded knee areas here, which is great if you have larger legs and you're resting your knees up against the transmission tunnel here. It's so nice to have that padded, and so I'm really glad they didn't overlook that. And so, all things considered, it's a very luxurious feeling interior for a vehicle that starts at, mid $30,000. Backseat space in the UX is pretty good, actually. So it looks smaller than it actually is. I think the main reason for that is because the door opening is very small, and that's the only complaint. Getting in and out is a little, I guess, more cumbersome than it would be in other small crossovers. But once you're actually inside of it, it's pretty roomy, all things considered, for a vehicle that's this size. I'm 5'9", I'm sitting behind myself. I have about 3 inches or so to spare there, maybe even 4, just because it's a little loose there for the seat back, so you can actually push that in a little bit further without actually digging your knees into the seat there. And so pretty roomy, honestly, for a small crossover. A lot of these almost have, almost like unusable back seats in some of the competing vehicles. So for this to have that much legroom in the back, I think is quite good. I just wish the door opening was a little bit larger. That's the only complaint. Otherwise, once you're back there, you have a fold down center armrest with 2 cup holders built into it. When you look forward, you'll see dedicated air vents, which is great, and 2 USB jacks, which is also awesome to, have everyone in this vehicle, have a USB jack for each person sitting in here, which is great. The only other thing, though, is there aren't any kind of pockets or bottle holders in the doors. So you only have the fold down armrest with the 2 cup holders there, and that is it as far as beverage holders in the vehicle. But otherwise, it still has a pretty good amount of headroom too, even though it's a little bit of a more rakish back end, but it looks and seems to be totally fine there in the back seat. And so, like I said, once you're in there, it's very comfortable. Just getting into it, it might be a little bit tricky at first. Trunk space in the UX is a little bit on the small side, but not too bad. So, it's a hatchback type of space back there, like you would see in any other normal hatchback. Not quite as large and not quite as boxy as some of the other crossovers. Obviously much smaller than like the NX, which is, about $4,000 more expensive and a little bit larger there. So you probably want to go up to that if you want more space, because even, I was hoping maybe there'd be some spaces under the floor or something, but there really isn't. There's just a few little cubbies and that's it under the floor. So you have a pretty high floor there, so it doesn't go too deep. And there's also a little bit of a lift over there where you have the bumper sticking out a little bit, and then you have a little bit of a lip, and then you get into the actual trunk itself. So you have to kind of bend over a little bit more to get into that trunk. But otherwise, it's still going to be, pretty usable for most people. And so I think, compared with some other competitors, I think it's right in line with the rest. And so overall, still a decent amount of trunk space back there for the size of the vehicle we're in. All right, so I'm gonna go for a drive. The UX here has the same key as any other Lexus, which is really nice. Has some metal here on the sides and rubberized buttons here on the back, but just a very nice and weighty feeling key. Feels really high quality. So of course it's keyless access, keyless entry, and push button start. So you just leave the key in your pocket, hit the engine start button, and it starts right up. All right, so setting off in the 2019 Lexus UX 200 F Sport. So the first thing that I notice, I think the first thing I notice is the directness of the throttle response. It is razor sharp, and that's partially thanks to this CVT transmission. So this has the same CVT as the Corolla hatchback, where it has a real first gear, and then it switches over to the CVT after that. They call it the direct drive or direct shift CVT, and it has 10 predefined gears within that CVT too, which is makes it one of the best CVTs, at least in the Corolla. I'll test it out in this and see, but just pulling away from a stop, that's the first thing I'm noticing, is it doesn't feel like a CVT until you're up and running, and it really masks the whole CVT feeling well, and this actually makes this my favorite CVT of the bunch so far. Other things to note here, really nice steering feel here, and the I think the F Sport version can get a little bit firmer with the steering in sport mode here. I'm just in normal mode right now, but it feels good. It feels pretty direct, nicely weighted, a little bit sportier, but not overkill or anything. and feels pretty good. Another thing is visibility is excellent here in the UX. You have pretty thin A-pillars. They're not the thinnest, but I do really like, they have a little window here, and the mirror is moved off to the door instead of, on the actual A-pillar. And, it's a pretty good view forward as well, too. The dashboard drops down pretty nicely. Hood drops down well. View out of the sides is also really good. Fairly chunky B-pillars, but they're a little further back there, so they don't get in your way too much. And view out of the back is also actually really nice and square. You would think, with this, type of a hatchback that it would be a little bit more raked and harder to see out of, but it's actually really easy to see out of. And getting up to some higher speeds here. This is where it actually behaves a lot like a normal automatic transmission, which is what I really love about this CVT. I mean, it is a little bit mushy once you're up and running, and it sometimes can feel a little bit like a CVT still, but it doesn't bother me at all so far, and I'll be curious to drive this around all week and see how that feels later on. But for right now, I think it actually drives very nicely. Another thing, whenever you're up at speed here, is, again, for a small crossover, a lot of these luxury crossovers, they're not nearly as refined as their more expensive counterparts, from those luxury companies, where this actually still feels pretty quiet, pretty refined. The ride is pretty smooth too, and it's a nice suspension setup. The suspension actually, so this vehicle is one of the new ones on Toyota's TNGA platform that many other Lexus models now are using as well. And it's a very diverse modular platform, so they can use it for vehicles of all shapes and sizes. So it doesn't mean they all drive the same or anything, but it just means this platform it really allows for a lot more refinement, I think, in the suspension setup. Now, the suspension setup in this one is actually very similar to in the Toyota CHR. But the powertrain and stuff is very similar to some other Toyotas, like the Corolla, like I mentioned with the CVT. So it's a combination of a little bit of part sharing from various different cars and vehicles, but it all so far, just from cruising around here, feels pretty nice. But we'll go ahead and put it up into the sport mode here, and let's turn down onto this back road here and see how it does. Here we go. Okay. Nicely gets up and starts moving here, pretty responsive, and then it starts getting more and more like a CVT. You can see it hanging out towards that red line and just sitting there once it knew I wanted just maximum acceleration. And so it's pretty punchy, I think. So it's running a 2-liter direct injected 4-cylinder engine, the same one that's in the Corolla hatch, 169 horsepower, one more than the Corolla, but 169 horsepower, 151 pound-feet of torque. Now this does weigh about 250 pounds heavier than a Corolla, so that means it's got a little more mass to get up and move. But thankfully, here in the UX 200, it's only front-wheel drive. You can only get the all-wheel drive in the hybrid version, and that is 176 horsepower combined. So it gets you, an extra few horsepower there in the hybrid version, and so that's would be nice to have, and that's the only way you get the all-wheel drive is with that hybrid one. But that also means that it makes those heavier too, so you get a few extra horsepower, but you also get some more weight. So I think with this, it's a little bit lighter just being front-wheel drive, and so it allows it to feel a little peppier. But having said all that, 0 to 60 time is claimed by Lexus at being 8.9 seconds, which sounds very slow. Honestly, it doesn't even, I'd say it's at least a second faster than that. At least that's the way it feels to me. it does not feel that slow, and you know, I could even potentially see this in like the high 7 second range, you know, mid 7 seconds. I think would actually feel appropriate. 8.9 sounds way too slow, because this does feel a little punchier, and I actually don't have any complaints with the acceleration so far. We'll try again. That one, all right, I got a little bit of wheel spin that time. And it gets up and goes really well. I think part of why it feels quicker than it should is because this 10-speed, you know, CVT, it really just keeps it in the middle of the power band, but makes it exciting, and you know, it doesn't waste any time. It doesn't get confused. It's very intelligently programmed, this CVT, and so I'm really appreciating that about it here. But coming up some corners here, let's see how the UX 200 handles. All right, so these tires, yeah, I think are a little bit to blame here. It handles pretty well. It's, you know, nice and low here, the UX, so it doesn't really feel like you're driving a crossover. It feels more like a slightly higher car, but it handles pretty well. I think I'm feeling a little bit of it like drifting around a little bit though whenever, it's not really body roll because it's not rolling, you know, from side to side. It's just, I guess a little bit of a lack of grip there that I'm feeling, but it's well masked, so that it just seems like I have a little bit lower limits, but I'm not totally sure why. We're running 225 wide Bridgestone Turanza all-season tires. They're run flat tires as well, so they're a little bit firmer. So that might be part of it. You know, we're on 18-inch wheels here on the F Sport version. I think it's going to be fine for normal daily driving, but I think if you definitely wanted more grip, I think that's what I'm feeling. The more and more that I keep going around corners here, the more it actually lit up the traction control light once on me there. So I think it just, you don't have a ton of grip here with these tires, especially the run flat version. So I think that might be a little bit of the disconnect that I'm feeling slightly, but otherwise it handles like it's on rails. Other than that, it's very flat. I'm very impressed. Definitely handles much sharper than the NX, that's for sure, obviously because it's slower. But yeah, I keep feeling those tires losing grip a little bit there. So that's the only thing that's a little bit disconcerting and kind of makes me want to take a step back and not have as much confidence in it just because of these tires. But otherwise, it's doing really well. I think it'd be cool, you know, obviously I know this is just an F Sport version. It'd be cool to have an offering of summer tires, but that's obviously very easy to swap on your own if you want more grip. Other things here though, you know, steering continues to feel good here around these corners though too. Very communicative and again, just nicely weighted. I don't think it really got any heavier here in sport mode, but still just continues to feel good. Brakes also have a nice immediate bite, you know, right towards the top of the pedal, but they're not too touchy either, so they feel just very natural and feel good. But otherwise, I really just love this transmission. Some other Lexus models, the transmission can be a little bit hot and cold, where, you know, sometimes it's hard to have a middle ground where it'll just either, you know, want to bog down too much, or it'll downshift and then just, you know, drive like you're wanting to go full throttle when you don't want to go full throttle. And this CVT is really well designed and programmed so that you can have that middle ground. Even in sport mode here, you don't have to, you know, have it giving me crazy RPMs every single time I lean into the gas pedal just a little bit. So I really like, you know, everything just, it's set up so well here, this UX. I'm really appreciating it so far. And yeah, I think honestly with a better pair of tires on here, I think this could really be a little go-kart. But I'm still enjoying it, you know, even despite the tires. And so yeah, that's about all I can really gather here from the UX so far. But anyway, thanks to Lexus, I'm going to have this vehicle for an entire week. So I'm going to drive around all week, and I'll come back and give you guys my final fuel economy, as well as, you know, my thoughts on the pricing and anything else that I noticed during my week of driving. Alright, so I've been driving the 2019 Lexus UX 200 F Sport for about a week now, and I've put 101 miles on it in my week of driving. Not a whole lot of driving here over the holidays, just kind of relaxing at home for the most part. And so this vehicle must have a huge range as far as the tank goes, because you know, I've done 100 miles, but it still is only showing that I've used just slightly under a quarter of a tank of gas, you know, maybe like an eighth of a tank according to the fuel gauge. So you know, have hardly dipped into that. And so because of that, you know, the last main thing I want to mention is the fuel economy here in the UX. So these are rated at 29 in the city, 37 on the highway, for a combined average of 33 mpg. Now, almost all of my driving was city, just a little bit of highway mixed in there. And so in that driving, I've only gotten 24.1 mpg. Now, it is the winter. I maybe did a little bit more idling than normal because of that. But that is still, you know, I mean, that's 5 mpg less than the city estimate, the worst estimate. And, you know, we just have this little 2-liter 4-cylinder CVT, no turbos, no all-wheel drive, even just front-wheel drive here. And, you know, to still be that far under is a little surprising to me. You know, I thought it would at least be a little higher than that, and I haven't really been hammering on the vehicle. You know, it's been pretty relaxed driving for most of that, aside from, you know, just that quick backroads drive. Everything else has been pretty sedate driving, so I was a little disappointed in that. I mean, maybe it's just, you know, you got 300 pounds extra to lug around over a Corolla hatch, so you know, you have a little bit of a sacrifice because of that, but the numbers are what the numbers are. That's what it's supposed to be rated at. So that's the only disappointment here that I really have with the UX. Otherwise, I think it's a phenomenal value, you know, for the money. These start around $34,000, This F Sport version, you know, with the front wheel drive and everything, as tested, this one is $39,665. And so I think, you know, you consider all the equipment this has, heated and cooled seats. It has a heated steering wheel. You know, all those types of things, I mean, are really nice features to have here in this vehicle. And then, you know, to have it all combined with, you know, a very, you know, reliable, efficient powertrain, to have this CVT, which is still my favorite CVT, I think, out there. I actually really enjoyed driving this vehicle over the weekend. You would think a vehicle this slow, I'd get frustrated with the lack of power, and the CVT would annoy me, and you know, you wouldn't think this is a very enthusiastic vehicle or a very fun vehicle to drive, but that's actually not correct. It's a very fun vehicle to drive. Although you don't have tons of power, you know, it means you can really push it hard and get on it and really get into it without, you know, going insanely high speeds. So I actually really have enjoyed, and just the compact dimensions especially, it makes it so easy to go shopping, you know, to park it, you know, to maneuver in tight spaces. Things like that are all very easy to do because of its small dimensions, but yet you have a little bit of a higher seating position than you do in something like a Corolla hatch or something like that. Now, compared to other competitors, though, that's where the biggest value comes into play. When you compare this to, you know, some of the competitors like the Mercedes GLA, the BMW X1, some of those might have a little bit more room, especially the X1, I think, is a little bit of a boxier shape, so you might have a little bit more cargo space and stuff. But I mean, those, even the GLA, I mean, the GLA is basically a lifted hatchback version of the A-Class that you get over in Europe. And I mean, so even more compact dimensions than this, I think, and that's still far and away more expensive. So I think they really have a sweet spot here where it's just, it undercuts the competition, you know, whenever you can compare the features and everything. The Apple CarPlay is standard. All those things are just so nice to have, and it just makes for a very compelling package that, you know, in addition to that, you have Lexus reliability, which is famous for being one of the best in the world. And so that means that while some of the others, you know, might have some issues in the long term, you know, a lot of the Germans do after a few years, the Lexus should be running strong and be issue-free and worry-free, which is, you know, a huge benefit as well, in addition to saving all the money you do save versus the competition. But yeah, so overall, I'm really impressed with the UX. I definitely recommend it for someone that's looking for a small, more luxurious, compact crossover. I think this is probably my favorite of the bunch so far. So yeah, huge thanks to Lexus for providing me with the UX here to review for you guys today. Let me know your thoughts on the UX in the comments below. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Take care.